Everyone, and welcome to this oral evidence session of the Welsh Affairs Select Committee looking at HMP Parc. My name is Ruth Jones and I'm the chair of the Select Committee. But before we begin properly, I'd like to make a statement with regards to the 17 deaths at HMP Parc this year and the House's sub judice resolution. A coroner's inquest has been opened into these deaths and those proceedings are now sub judice. But with the permission of the Speaker, I am waiving the sub judice resolution for today's evidence session, given the interest and the importance of these issues. Members are not intending to inquire into the specific circumstances of any individual's death, and all members and witnesses will exercise caution, I'm sure, in their questions and answers, given the possibility of any future criminal or civil proceedings in relation to those deaths. And I should also say that several members of the committee and myself visited HMP Parc last month, and we want to thank everyone for their hospitality and involvement there. And also we have a lot to get through today. We have two panels, so I will make a plea for short answers, please, from the panel. But it's really good to have you in the room with us today. Thank you very much for that. And also I need to mention we have a special guest with us today. Alex Barrow-Curtis is guesting with us from the Justice Committee, bringing his expertise from that area and hopefully taking some interesting information back. Brilliant, thank you. So may I welcome Will Stiles, Gordon Brockington, Ian Barrow and Sian Hibbs. And can you please introduce yourselves in that order, starting off with Mr Stiles, please.
Morning, Chair. I'm Will Stiles, Director of HMP Parc.
Good morning, Chair. Gordon Brockington, I'm the Managing Director for Care and Justice, G4S.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Ian Barrow. I'm Executive Director of His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service in Wales.
Good morning, I'm Sian Hibbs, Deputy Director within HMPPS in Wales.
Thank you very much. Lovely. Okay, let's think about this, because obviously 17 deaths in a single year, and we've had a look at the previous stats for Parc. There will be families of men who have been affected and impacted directly as a result of these deaths. So I suppose my question is a broad one, but it's to Will and Gordon first. In terms of the safety of the men who are there now, can you guarantee that these men are safe? I'll ask Mr Stiles first.
Yes, so we have done an awful lot of work this year to improve safety and security for the men. So I think we've made really significant progress in improving safety outcomes, and certainly when we look at measures including self-harm and violence, the metrics have improved very significantly, the trends since April. So, we know in terms of measurable outcomes that things have improved, and also I would say that since June we haven't had an apparent non-natural causes deaths. So in terms of outcomes, there have been improvements. In terms of the work that's been going on, that is measurable. We have evidence of it here. There's been an awful lot of work that's gone on. And in talking to the men, which I know you have done, the feedback from the men is also that things are improving in terms of conditions for them, in terms of the regime, and in terms of safety.
Okay. Mr Brockington.
I'd just like to start with saying this was an incredibly sad time for Parc, and our thoughts are with the family and friends, and remains with the family and friends with the ongoing inquests. All those that have lost loved ones at Parc, our thoughts really are with them. In terms of the 17 deaths, I think it's important to note that in 2024, indeed, we did have 17, and that was made up of 8 natural causes deaths, predominantly of elderly gentlemen, which you saw, on the wings, because we have palliative care at Parc. 3 self-inflicted deaths, and 5 we believe to be drugs related. And if I can just talk about those very briefly, if I may. We have an ageing population at Parc. In 22, 13% of the population were over the age of 50, increasing to 14 in 23, and today 16% are over the age of 50. So we have an ageing population, and say we are one of the 2 palliative care centres in Wales. The other significant cohort and the significant issue that occurred in the first half of this year was the ingress of nitazenes into the prison. 5 deaths. Now, sadly, that replicates what has been happening in the community and in society. data from March 22 to 24 shows that 40 deaths occurred to nitazines and 390 across England and Wales. Sadly, nitazines got into our prisons. If I can just remind the committee, these are drugs that are 1,000 times, up to 1,000 times more powerful than morphine. So, you know,
Mr. Brockett, we're going to
go into that, but I just wanted to put in context, Chair, why the deaths that occurred.
Sure, thank you very much. And I suppose the question is, many of us have had constituents write to us, but with concerns about people who are currently in HMP Parc and they're very anxious about things. So my question to Mr. Stiles first and then Mr. Brockington, what measures are you taking to actually make sure that these men are kept in a safe environment?
So the work that we've done this year is primarily looking at 6 key work streams to do with improving our staffing situation in terms of training, capability, staffing numbers, because that's a key issue. You have to have the right numbers of staff there to look after men properly. We have pushed a large volume of work in terms of safety processes, particularly how we support men who are at risk of harm and self-harm. We have been doing a lot of work in terms of security to increase our capability, to increase our the equipment that we have available, our staffing levels and our searching processes. So just for example, we are on a monthly basis now carrying out 5 times more staff searches than we were 7 or 8 months ago. So there's an awful lot of work going on there. In terms of drugs, we are doing a lot of security work to prevent drugs getting into the prison, which is a real challenge. As you know, you've seen that for yourself. And a lot of work in terms of supporting men to desist from drug use. We're pushing work because all of this all threads together. None of this sits on its own. So it's all about a whole regime. We're doing a lot of work to improve the regime, because where we get regime consistency and men understand what's going to happen every day and what their experience will be that day, it takes away a lot of the frustration that can result in self-harm and violence. So we're working very hard to give that regime consistency and improve communication. That has gone down really well for the men. That has really reduced anxiety and basics in terms of respect. So we're pushing hard in terms of cleanliness, making sure every cell has all of the things in that it should. We've spent a lot of money on equipment for the units to make sure people have the right access to catering equipment and leisure equipment. So we're pushing across a number of work streams to try and improve conditions in the prison, improve safety, improve security, because all of those things weave together to improve well-being for men, reduce anxiety and reduce security risks and risks of harm.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Barrow, you've heard now some of the measures that have been taken this year to improve and update. So how will HMPPS be actually monitoring this progress?
There's a number of things that we've got in terms of sort of monitoring. Firstly, we've obviously got a contract with HMPPS. There are monthly contract management meetings overseen by Sian and her team. We have a controller team of public sector staff that are based in the prison. So they sort of monitor performance on a day-to-day basis and will sort of report back any concerns they have. I myself meet regularly with Will, Gordon and other members of the senior team. But we're also supporting what's going on in Parc, and I think it's important to point out that we've done a lot of joint work with Parc over the last 6 months. So HMPPS has supported Parc with our National Substance Misuse team, our National Safety team. We've used regional search teams to help out with Parc. So we're very much looking at it as a partnership approach in terms of improvement.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Alex Barrows-Curtis now, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a couple of questions on the drugs issue that you were talking about. So Mr. Stiles and Brockington particularly. We're obviously, the committee and the Justice Committee are well aware drugs are an issue for all prisons, but what I think would be helpful to understand is whether Parc itself was insufficiently prepared for these new and particularly kind of dangerous, harmful substances.
So I don't think Parc is unique by any stretch of the imagination. The synthetic opioid issue across the whole of UK and Wales is significant, and a prison is a microcosm of the community, and sadly these horrendous synthetic opioids, especially nitazines, are present in the community, and they got into prison, and they got into Parc. You're looking for a needle in a haystack. As you know, you've seen the size of what the staff are looking for. We have, as Will said, we have bolstered the security. We've used external resource from G4S's other prisons to deploy down to conduct extensive searching. We're working with the authority on enhanced gate security, which is positive. One of the keys, and I know this is something that the Justice Select Committee have been looking at again, is the lock zone. So we were the first to roll out the lock zone across the whole of the prison. We've now got over 730 members of staff trained on the lock zone that is available to all members of staff across Parc. But we've also been working for a couple of things, working with Bath University on detection. So we now have a mobile detection piece of equipment for nitazines. We were the first to deploy that. That's now being deployed across the broader public sector. We've presented at the Synthetic Opioid Conference to share our learning. I think sharing the learning is absolutely key on this, because we were the first and we were in unprecedented times. And we're also piloting new technology that can actually see through clothes, because we're looking for pieces of paper that are very, very small indeed. And this new technology looks very positive. I saw it firsthand when I was down in Parc last week.
And Mr. Stiles, if you want to add anything or on that point, or that was very, very helpful, but just I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
If you're content with that, that's great.
That's great. And Mr. Barrow, just in terms of reflecting on that and obviously experience with other prisons across Wales, the issue with nitazines, other serious drugs, is it a problem contained to Parc, or is it a problem we're seeing across the entire prison estate?
We have had issues with synthetic opioids and synthetic cannabinoids across the estate. We've not, thankfully, had the issue that Parc had in terms of sort of nitazines to the extent that Parc had. But within HMPPS in Wales and nationally, we are doing a lot of work, both in terms of preparing staff about what is a very fast-moving area, unfortunately, in terms of sort of developments in synthetic drugs. We are looking at enhancing our monitoring. That's included changes to mandatory drug tests in custody. Nationally, we're trialling wastewater testing to allow us to sort of understand more of where the drugs are in the system. Gordon's mentioned the treatment process. We are rolling out naloxone across all of the prisons in Wales, because that is obviously a key in fighting the dangers of this. And the final point I'd make is there's a lot of work going on in terms of sort of enforcement. So there's lots of engagement with local police forces and nationally in terms of understanding how the drugs are ingressing into the prisons, which is obviously sort of something that's very important to us in terms of trying to resolve.
Which leads me very nicely, segue into the final question I had for the three of you in terms of the partnerships, particularly I guess for Parc, that it can have with other stakeholders, South Wales Police, but all police forces in Wales, local health boards, the Welsh Government. Is there enough cooperation there? Does more need to happen? Is there anything that is lacking that would sort of buttress that? I'd just be grateful for your thoughts on that.
So our cooperation with the police has been really, really positive. They are engaged in every security work stream that we have, and just to give you a really good example of the level of support we get, a recent drone incursion, the support we got from the police was a helicopter. So the response there is really good. We are working very closely with partners. Just in terms of your original question, what I should have mentioned is, having worked in a number of prisons, I would say the resources and capabilities at Parc in terms of the number of staff deployed to counter drug work and the equipment is, I have never seen a prison with better capabilities and resources than Parc has.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Claire Hughes, please.
Could I assist to Mr. Brockington? So, taking into account everything we've just heard now, which is positive, but we know that safety in prison is paramount. However, the largest increases in assaults on prison staff, self-harm incidents requiring hospital treatment, were all recorded at Parc in 2023. So, given everything we've just heard this morning, Mr. Brockington, do you feel is HMP Parc a safe prison?
To follow on from what Will said, I do. I've been there on many occasions, and I'm confident that the six-strand strategy which Will has deployed covering all the key areas of safety, security, and that includes a very robust review of act management, and a mental health review as part of the health needs assessment. I think, we have embedding all the key strategies we need to continue to look forward. And I think that's one of the things I did want to get across today was the first half of the year was difficult for Parc and incredibly sad for the families. And again, our hearts and thoughts are with them. But we have to look forward. And I think what we're seeing really, really good progress. I've witnessed it firsthand. Some of you have also seen that progress. And we have to, put the foundations in place to continue to move forward into 25. So yes, I am very confident in both what Will is delivering, but also the senior leadership team at site, and all our, over 700 professional caring staff from the South Wales community that come to work and do, the vast majority of these people are utterly brilliant, and they do a fantastic job day in, day out. So I am very confident.
Thank you. For Mr. Stiles, specifically, you've talked more about what you have been doing as part of that sixth step and the changes to your regime, but particularly around supporting men who are in mental health crisis. Could you just outline a little bit more about what you're doing specifically in that area?
So health services are not commissioned or managed by G4S. What I would say on mental health is there is a lot of work has gone on. However, we have had a health needs analysis which has recently arrived, which reinforces, I think, a conclusion that we've all come to, that in a range of services related to mental health and substance misuse, actually, more needs to be done in terms of resourcing. So the frequency and number of psychiatric sessions that we're providing for the men and the number of mental health caseworkers that we have at Parc is significantly short of where we think it should be. So there is more work to do in terms of mental health, but I do need to add to that, we don't commission it, we're not the provider, so I probably shouldn't say too much about health.
And beyond that, so again to you, Mr. Stiles, so is there anything in terms of more additional support that you require in order to improve both prisoner and staff safety at HMP Parc?
We've got a really good plan that we have been working to, and it's been delivering outcomes. I would say there is a resource question around our health provision, certainly in terms of mental health for prisoners, which I've talked about. In terms of staffing, safety, staff assaults this year, or certainly since April, have reduced very significantly. We're working very smartly in terms of how we deliver our staff training now to make sure that when our new officers hit the streets and are operational, they are really, really equipped with the skills they need to de-escalate incidents and manage incidents to a resolution that doesn't result in violence. I think we just need to stay on the trajectory we are now in terms of building staff confidence, building visible leadership from managers, and getting to a place where our culture moves away from punishing our way out of a problem into a model which we've seen at another G4S prison, Oakwood, which is much more about relying on or working with prisoners in peer roles so that we have a much more rewarding kind of culture that everyone has a stake in.
Thank you. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, or?
No, the only thing I would say is I should have commented earlier, the support that we've had from our HMPPS, we haven't done this in isolation, as Will said, the support we've had from HMPPS colleagues and South Wales Police and the Health Board, we've done this as a collaborative working because we were in unprecedented times and we were learning a lot. So I think that support has been very helpful.
Thank you.
Anne Davis, please.
Thank you. Before I ask my question, can I just thank you for the visit we had last month? Really informative and really interesting. So thank you very much for hosting us there. Following on from Claire's question, really, mine is about the healthcare and the fact that you have several elderly prisoners within Parc. They often have complex and intensive needs, and as you mentioned, there's a palliative care centre within your prison. Can I ask if you're equipped, do you feel that you're equipped to deal with the needs of these prisoners?
So again, I would say I need to be a little bit considered in answering, because it's a service that's not commissioned or delivered by G4S or managed by me. What I would say is, generally speaking, with the care of elderly men and those who've reached or are reaching the end of their life, generally speaking, our provision is good, our social care provision is good, and our healthcare provision is good for men reaching end of life. The shortcoming I would say we have that we will want to address is the number of rooms we have available for end of life, which I think has been also identified in the health needs assessment, that we need more. So we need more space. But in terms of the staffing we have, of the support from Bridge End Council and our healthcare staff, I think our provision is good.
Thank you. Can I ask Mr Brockington, do you have any plans to increase the amount of healthcare resource available? So perhaps adding on to the rooms issue, actually, and the needs assessment that's happened, to cope with the average age of your prisoner. You know, do you feel, apart from the rooms, that there's something else that you can do?
Again, to follow on from Will's point, we don't commission the health services, so I think it'd be a point for HMPPS colleagues to comment on. And that's not to pass it over.
We'll move that nicely on to Mr Barrow then.
I'll hand over to Sian in a minute, but I would point to the health needs assessment that we've just done with Cwmtaf and Ganwg, which we're still analysing, but I'm confident that Cwmtaf and Ganwg will work closely with us in terms of responding to that and to those individual needs. But you want to, Sian?
Yeah, I mean, we transferred healthcare to the local health board in December 2022. As part of that, we went through a negotiation with them. We actually were uplifting the staffing numbers by about approximately 20%. As part of that, I think, to be clear, they haven't reached that staffing level yet, so they've struggled to recruit into certain posts, and therefore I think when we see some of those posts come into fruition, then I think we'll see some improvements as well. So we'll take the health needs analysis, but also pushing them to recruit to their staffing levels that we committed to.
Can I ask just one other follow-up on that? One thing that we discussed on the day was key performance indicators, really, for the healthcare unit there. And although there aren't many that we can look at within Wales that have a similar situation as you have in Parc, but there are across the UK. So is there a way that we can use key performance indicators as to see how effective, I'm not talking about efficiency really, but how effective the healthcare unit is in serving the prisoners within Parc?
So I'll pick up on this. So we've got a partnership agreement with the Welsh Government, and we're driving really for a standard service specification for healthcare services, and that's one of our key tasks, and as part of what will come out of that is key performance indicators. What we've been able to do since 2017, when Barrow opened, we had a service specification for Barrow. We've got a service specification for Parc. And what we do ourselves, working with Welsh Government, is we try to look at assuring ourselves that actually the service specification itself is being delivered in the first instance. But it's something we are striving for, but we have to work with Welsh Government and closely with Welsh Government around that.
Okay. Just a supplementary to that. Is there a timescale for that? Because I think the key performance indicators can give us the evidence that the service is a good service.
Part of the reason for it not being a quick fix is because people record things on System 1 really differently. So, of course, which is the healthcare system that they record things, and therefore you won't get consistency of data. So it's something we're pushing for with Welsh Government around a refreshed partnership agreement at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay, Andrew Ranger, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to explore this health issue a little bit more and recognising the caveats you've already mentioned, so it's to Mr Stiles and Mr Brockington to begin with. Obviously prisoners aren't sentenced to poorer health outcomes, So have there been instances where men at HMP Parc have not been able to access the healthcare services they need? So have you had reports of that?
I think if I'd answer that one, if that's all right. So obviously, whenever there's an unfortunate death in custody, there's also prison probation ombudsman investigation into those. And what we get from that is a report into each one of those which tells us whether or not there's been the equivalence of what they could have received in the community. Obviously, we haven't received that many in terms of relation to outcomes from the deaths this year, but we've had one recently for something 2 years ago, which will be published, I anticipate, soon. So, that's what it basically tells us, is how equivalent was this service to the community. There are some whereby the equivalence is not there, and there are some where actually the equivalence is there, and actually the service is to a higher standard than the community. So it's on an individual case. We'll look at those.
Okay.
And then there's an action plan that comes from any recommendations that come from those PPO reports. And again, that's a joint owned action plan, or should I say a partnership action plan. There'll be some actions for healthcare, there'll be some actions for the provider, there'll be some actions for us as HMPPS, and there'll be some actions for Welsh Government as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we had, one must say thank you for the visit as well. It was really informative, and it was great to visit there. So we had reports from prisoners there that there were delays in getting healthcare, or seen to, if that's the right way to word it, and how, what is the process? If someone does need healthcare, what would be the process? Would they raise it with a prison officer, or how do they access the healthcare in the prison, and how might there be delays in that process? Probably to Mr. Stiles.
Make an application through staff or through our CMS system, and then they will go onto a waiting list. But in many cases, we would hope they would see the GP if there's a GP clinic on that day, the same day.
Right.
I mean, just going back to your original question, which I wasn't sure specifically related to deaths. I mean, there are examples of people waiting longer to access services than they should. For example, the health needs analysis, which I don't know if you've seen, identified very long waits for men to access secure mental health beds in the community from Parc, much longer than the national average. So I would say yes, there are examples of delays.
Okay, thank you. And just, you mentioned the CMS system there, and we did get some feedback about there were sometimes issues with that for prisoners. Is that something you recognise, or...?
There are some frustrations around it, but I have to say it's a better system than exists in most prisons, and it's a system we hope to update in the coming year by moving to a tablet-based system, every prisoner having a tablet to access those application systems. So that should improve quite quickly.
Excellent, thank you. And to Mr. Barrow, now we have touched on this, and possibly Ms. Hibbs as well. How comparable is the healthcare provision at HMP Parc to that available in the community and also across the prison estate of comparable size? You've sort of touched on it already, but I'll be interested if you could expand on that.
So I think I'm in danger of repeating what Sian said, but I think that sort of, one of the parameters we've got for that are the Ombudsman reports, which do say sometimes it's equivalent, sometimes it's not what it should have been necessarily. I think that's fair to say that happens across each of the prisons in Wales. Each of the prisons in Wales are obviously different health board, so there are different arrangements, but I think it's why the engagement we've got with Welsh Government and the work we're doing on the agreement for prison health is so important. That's why it's one of the things that we're prioritising at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, just echo.
Yeah, fair enough. And I mean, just a slight different thing, talking about sort of well-being of prisoners. I was actually really, I have to say, quite impressed by some of the things that you were doing on education and sort of workplace training there. I was quite impressed by that. And people getting qualifications, hopefully to get into jobs or college or when they, on release, and some of the education in a wider context, and the family unit as well. But what I was interested in, and we did talk about this when we were on site, is actually how is that success or success of that measured? So is it measured, once people are released, is the measurement stopped? How do you know what you're doing in HMP Parc has a long-lasting effect and is successful in the long run, as opposed to just measuring it up to when people leave? I would suggest perhaps Ms. Hibbs maybe.
Yeah, so there's a variety of measures. I mean, I think what I would say is every single prisoner's got an employment advisory board, and that you've got there somebody who's an employer in the community, who's a champion for prisoners in that community, or, and in bringing in employers into the prison as well to work with us. But some of our measures are around employment on release, and employment 6 weeks post-release, and employment 6 months post-release. So we'll track that as a whole system approach. So not just it leaves G4S's hands, obviously, when that prisoner leaves the prison, but it transfers into probation's monitoring, and that's how we monitor them. Yes.
We do focus on that quite a lot, and I'm very pleased to say across HMPPS in Wales, our figures are both employment at 6 weeks post-release and employment 6 months post-release are above the national average, and it's something we do focus on in Wales.
Right. Anything either of the two of you wanted to add to that from your perspective?
Just in terms of post-release, obviously key issues for us are employment and accommodation. Key is men having somewhere to live when they leave, and relatively speaking, for prison leavers, our data is good. We've got 90% plus accommodation on release on first night, and our employment figures compare very well with the national average after 6 weeks and 6 months, at over 19% at 6 weeks and 35% at the 6 month point, which compares quite well with others.
The only thing I was going to add was you saw C Block when you were there, which was the Neurodiversity Centre, which has got autism accreditation. I think that having a tailored solution to individuals' needs, I think, is absolutely key to success, as they go through the justice system. So, that is been a resounding success at Parc, and we continue to, focus on that in all levels of neurodiversity.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Alex Barrow-Scotus has a brief supplementary.
Very brief, Chair. Thank you. It follows on from what a couple of the panel have said in terms of palliative care and an ageing prison population. As I understand it, Parc is one of the few prisons where it offers a palliative care system, and there is evidence suggesting this is unduly pushing up deaths. And so I wonder what the thinking of the panel, each of you before us is, or one of you is on that, and what needs to change, because obviously that's a kind of retrograde outcome, given we're talking about health outcomes here.
So I think in Wales we've got two centres. We've got HMP Barrow and HMP Parc, which I think is, at the moment, is probably sufficient for the population that we've got. I mean, there is definitely, I think, a need to sort of consider future options. I mean, we have got an ageing population generally. There is an ageing prison population, particularly in certain categories of prisoners, and it's definitely something we should keep an active eye on, I think.
David Chadwick, please.
Thank you, Chair. Question for Will and Gordon. How does most contraband get into HMP Parc?
So there are a number of ingress routes for contraband into prisons. It can be thrown over the wall, it can be brought in by visitors, secreted in their bodily orifices or in children's nappies, etc., when they come to social visits with their loved ones. Staff corruption is an issue in many prisons, and one of the key ingress routes certainly being experienced at Parc are kind of industrial specification drone drops being organised by organised crime gangs, in our case organised crime gangs which we think are kind of centred around Wales and the Midlands.
One thing I'd like to add to that is, we talk about corrupt staff a lot. The vast majority of staff that work at Parc aren't corrupt. It is an ingress route, the same as Will said, visits is an ingress route, but as is drones, as is over the wall. It takes 20 seconds to get a drone over the wall, drugs into the prison and back out again. And when you're looking for very, very small amounts of drugs, which can create an enormous problem in a prison. So a very small amount of drugs, once it's applied to paper, can create a big problem. So, we saw the security brief when we were on site. It remains a challenge, but I just want to stress that the vast majority of staff are hard-working, professional, and totally committed to Parc.
Does Parc need additional investment to target this, and if so, where exactly is that investment best targeted?
If you're happy for me to answer that. Look, I think I said previously we're working really closely with HMPPS, and one of the key areas of investment two areas of investment. The first is enhanced gate security, which we're which we're looking to deploy. The other is the Windows program. Many of you saw when you were walking around the windows open quite clearly. We have already started a Windows replacement program, and we're in dialogue to accelerate that Windows program. I think that sits at the key of a lot of the movement of drugs into and around Park. So I think that's a very encouraging step forward, and something that we're in advanced discussions around accelerating.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Llynos Medi, please.
Yeah. Can I also thank you for the visit and also for the nature of the conversations we had across the whole community at Parc. You mentioned there the corruption and that it's a small percentage, but unfortunately that small percentage does have a negative impact on the staffing. Can you explain to me how the vetting system is in place on the prison staff compared to other public services, to just maybe give confidence to the local community as well?
So I can, if I'll start, and then Will can no doubt add more. So we conduct three components to our vetting. We comply fully to HMPPS vetting, which is exactly the same as every other prison officer would do in all public sector prisons. On top of that, at GFRES, we also conduct DBS, which many of you will recognise, and also our own GFRES vetting. And this covers 3-year verbal references, written 10 years written feedback, credit identity checks, etc., etc. So to become a prison officer in GFRES, you have enhanced vetting over and above what you would see just for HMPPS, but we also comply fully with HMPPS's process. Will, I don't know if you...
No, I think that sums it up. So, a prison custody officer at HMP Parc goes through the exact same vetting checks through the SSCL process as a prison officer at Cardiff or Swansea, and in addition to that goes through an added layer of G4S vetting.
Thank you. When you have the instances of corruption, how do you identify them? So when you've had these incidents where you've had staff corruption, how have you identified them?
So many have found, so I say many.
So, sorry, how do we find them, or how do we then flag them in terms of their future vetting?
Find them, and then how do you then, obviously then, yeah.
So if somebody has been found to have committed significant misconduct, particularly if it led to dismissal, we inform the DBS system and the HMPPS SSCO system, and they are then flagged. So if they were to apply for a job in public service in the future, or any job requiring vetting, that information has been shared with the vetting service. In terms of identifying staff who may be engaged in corrupt activity, so we have a multi-agency counter-corruption team, every prison does, which involves our own security team, colleagues from Regional Counter-Corruption Unit, which, as you may be aware, HMPPS over the last year has significantly increased the Counter-Corruption Unit team, I think from 25 to 150. The police are also part of our counter-corruption team. So primarily we develop intelligence. We have a dedicated counter-corruption intelligence reporting system for staff, which is really well used. So if you are a member of staff and you have concerns about somebody else, even if they're minor, you are absolutely encouraged to support a to submit a counter-corruption intelligence report. We develop that intelligence. We use that intelligence with police colleagues who use resources and capabilities that they have, and that's primarily how we get results. We get intelligence from prisoners as well, of course, but we pull all of that together, and that gives us a really solid intel picture.
I would also add that I get a monthly brief. Myself and my Chief Operating Officer get a monthly brief from Will and the Head of Security. We look at all counter-corruption activity. And I do that across all my prisons, and that allows me to understand what the themes are, see if there's any outliers, so we have a full picture, and that and that is key, and that is allows us to understand any themes that might be happening not just in Parc but across the whole of the UK, which we can then feed back into the system.
So most staff who come in to the prison system who engage in corrupt activities at some point, most of them haven't joined with that intention. So, we haven't got people joining Parc with significant criminal records or part of organised crime gangs. They are corrupted whilst they're in prison by some fairly experienced and sophisticated prisoners who have skills in corrupting. So we have a register, so we keep, we focus on those, particularly who we know are known corruptors from a security standpoint as well.
And Gordon, you mentioned there that you compare data from other prisons. How does the corruption level in the staff in Parc compare to other prisons that you're in?
I would say it's broadly similar. I can't talk about specifics for obvious reasons, but there's certainly no outliers in Parc. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And just in last one to you as well is if the legislation were to be changed to allow for prison offenders to be x-rayed by the body scanners, would G4S support their staff being searched in this way?
We would comply fully to the law and to HMPPS's direction on this. One thing, we have a huge amount of technology in Parc. I have a list, but I'm not going to go through it for time reasons. But we are, last week I was in Parc and I saw firsthand a brand new bit of kit which we're piloting at the moment, which can basically see through your clothes and see very small pieces of paper that, which is sorts of things we're looking for, or any other contraband that might be being smuggled in or around the prison. This is mobile, it can be used in a number of different areas. So whilst we would fully comply to, scanners, I think it's incumbent to use a portfolio of tools that are available to us, including new technology, to make sure that we stay one step ahead. And that's exactly what we're doing at Parc.
Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Witherden, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask some questions about staffing, please, and initially to Mr Stiles. So, retention of prison officers is a challenge across the prison estate as a whole. Should G4S prison staff be paid more?
Well, can I just talk a little bit about retention and recruitment? So, over the last 18 months, Parc has had a challenge in terms of recruitment and retention, particularly with PCOs. What I would say is that since June, we've had a net increase of 45 PCOs, which is good, and that's a good indicator of our retention rates are improving, our recruitment rates are improving, staff feel more valued, enjoying the job more, feeling better supported, feeling the impact of visible leadership. There is more to a reward package than just salary, and people working for an organisation where they feel valued and respected and engaged is really important. Should they earn more? That's a really difficult question because, frankly, I think that anyone who works in a prison deserves a gold medal the size of a dinner plate. We're a commercial organisation in G4S, and we have to apply the rate that finds the right balance for us in terms of recruitment and retention, and us being comfortable that we are respecting and rewarding our staff.
One of the things I would add, if I may, is whilst HMPPS's staffing opening salary rate is a guide, we don't just compete against other prisons. We compete against the labour market in South Wales. So we have to make sure that we are aligned with the logistics organisations and with the retail organisations. People join to be a prison officer for very unique reasons because, as Will said, they need a gold medal the size of a dinner plate. So we measure ourselves against the local community as opposed to HMPPS's prison service pay rates.
Thank you. The second question, we've touched on this already in relation to self-harm and substance misuse, but are staff shortages at HMP Parc making it an unsafe prison? I'll put that to Mr Stiles first, please.
Well, what I would say is we are not in a critical staffing position. So we are within weeks now of being fully staffed, and in an organisation that has a lot of flexibility in terms of overtime. That's a really good position to be in. So what I would say is we're not short-staffed. We have been. You know, if I look back 6 months, there were points in time where we were short-staffed, but we had the capacity and capability to cover that with overtime.
Thank you. Mr. Brockington, would you like to come in on that?
I would say that staffing levels and shortage of staffing levels is not unique to certainly to Parc. We see it across the whole of the UK. So again, as corruption, I have a view across the whole of the G4S estate, and it remains a challenge. I think Parc is doing really well in its retention, its recruitment. We've used various different organisations to support us with recruitment, but when you look at the whole resource package, you have to look at sickness and all components as well, all of which are going in the right direction. So I think it's a positive view looking forward for Parc.
Could I just add to that? Just in terms of indicators of staff being engaged and feeling valued and supported, my experience at Parc is based on June to today because that's how long I've been there. But in that time, our daily average sickness figures have reduced from over 60 down to the mid-20s, which, from our point of view, is a really good indicator that people are feeling more and more valued.
Can I thank you for that, the up-to-date data from June onwards. Right now, what is the ratio of prison officers to prisoners at HMP Parc?
There are all sorts of ways of working now, but what I can tell you is we've got about 1,780 prisoners today, and we have 353 PCOs. So that's one way of working out the ratio. Another is the ratio of staff to prisoners in any given area at any given time. But the ratios that we have profiled to and we operate with are in accordance with the HMPPS specifications.
Okay. Final question, Chair, to Mr. Barrow, please. Going off what we've just heard, how does this ratio compare to public sector prisons of a comparable size and categorisation to HMP Parc?
It'd be very similar. I mean, obviously, across the estate in Wales, we've got a variety of different types of prisons, so it's not a direct comparison with prison. But as Mr. Sal said, the ratio they use in HMP Parc is set by us in terms of the service specification, and that will be worked out in comparison with some activity in the public estate as well.
And if I could add to that, when we ran the competition for Parc, one of the things we test as part of that is a number of heat maps at different times during the day to make sure actually what the proposal is from the providers is actually a safe and decent environment. And if it hadn't been safe and decent, they would have been excluded from the competition.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the panel for your engagement with us today, and also the honest and open way and transparent way that you have answered the questions. It's much appreciated, and seeing you in person is really helpful. I'm now going to suspend the sitting. We will follow up, if that's okay with you, in writing any questions which we may have outstanding. So, we want to thank you in advance for any correspondence after this. But I'm going to suspend the sitting now, and a reminder to members that the public gallery remains open. So order. Sitting of the Welsh Affairs Select Committee. And good morning to our second panel. To Lord Timpson, it's very good to see you in front of us. Thank you for your time today. And our returner, Ian Barrow. Thank you. As I said at the start of the first session, I am waiving the sub judice resolution for today's evidence session because there have been 17 deaths, as we've already heard, at HMP Parc this year. A coroner's inquest has been opened into the deaths of men at HMP Parc, and those proceedings are now sub judice. Members, as I said in the first panel, are not intending to inquire into the specific circumstances of any individual's death, and I'm sure all members and witnesses will exercise caution in their questions and answers, given the possibility of future criminal or civil proceedings in relation to these deaths. I would also like to express my concern and frustration around the Ministry of Justice's recent decision to refuse the Freedom of Information request regarding Wales-only prison data submitted by Dr Rob Jones of the Wales Governance Centre. And this data has been incredibly valuable in the past in informing the work of this committee, as well as its previous iterations, as the data in question is not publicly available and can only be ascertained by certain FOI requests. So, given that a previous iteration of this committee explicitly called on the Ministry of Justice in 2019 to work with Dr Rob Jones to produce a schedule for the publication of Wales-specific justice data, I am very, very disappointed at the Department's recent decision to not follow up this. And I will write to the Department to understand why this decision has been taken and to ascertain why the Department appears so reluctant to publish Wales-specific justice data. We also note that there is a statement expected later on today from the Secretary of State for Justice regarding the 10-year plan on prisons and capacity. So it's good to see our committee is certainly leading the way on discussions on prisons. I will reiterate my plea for short answers, please. And we have got a lot to get through before we break at 11 a.m. And I welcome Lord Timpson. Perhaps you could introduce yourself, sir.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me here today, Chair. My name is James Timpson and I'm the Minister for Prisons, Probation and Reducing Reoffending.
Thank you very much. And Ian Barrow, would you like to reintroduce yourself?
Well, I'm Ian Barrow. I'm the Executive Director for His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service in Wales.
Thank you very much. If I may begin with Lord Timpson. We had your predecessor attended this committee earlier on this year. I appreciate it's a different political colour, but he considered Parc to be a well-run and effective prison. To what extent do you share that assessment?
I haven't been to Parc until last week, but I've been to many, many prisons over 25 years. So all I can tell you is what I see today. I've obviously looked at all the inspector's reports from the past. What I sense is it's going in the right direction. There's still more work to be done. The standards were good. The culture was good. I spent a lot of time on the wings talking to men, sitting in cells and getting a feel of how they are progressing with their sentences and how well the prison is run. And from my experience, there was a lot of stuff that I saw there that I was really impressed with. A lot of engagement. I know that the team have been doing a really big change, a big piece of change since Will and the team have been really focused on it. And I think they're making progress. Still more to do. But from what I saw, I was impressed.
Thank you. And the reason we've convened this session today is because of the 17 deaths in HMP Parc in this year alone. So I suppose, how satisfied are you with the response from HMP Parc to those deaths? And obviously we have families of the gentlemen concerned who will be listening and watching today. And I suppose, should they be concerned for the well-being of the men who are currently being held in prison there?
Well, it's absolutely devastating that 17 people have died in our care in Parc Prison this year, and the impact on their families and friends, their fellow prisoners and the staff in HMP Parc is unbearable for them. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd just like to read out the names of the 17 men who died. It'll take me a minute.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Jason Hussey, John Rose, Christopher Stokes, Justin Lewis, Shay Andrews, Cameron Anthony, Wayne Hay, David Maggs, Michael Horton, Warren Manners, Robert Royan, Robert Rickson, John Hyde, Terry Hume, Malcolm James, David Ridgway and Victor Rochester. And these are all people who went in there to serve their sentence and sadly passed away in the prison. and it is absolutely devastating. As was heard in the previous hearing, it is a very complex prison. It's a big prison. The age profile, not just of Parc, but generally is increasing in our prisons across Wales. And but from what I saw, the care, the healthcare, and the work of the team to address some of the issues that they had, I think was admirable. But one of my concerns with this prison and all prisons is around drugs and the type of drugs that can get in.
Thank you. And I suppose your predecessor specified that he had no plans to remove the contract from G4S. Can you confirm that or deny that? Are you of the same mind?
I am of the same mind. As I mentioned before, I've seen a number of prisons over the years, both in private ownership and public ownership, and it comes down to leadership and focus and the way that the prison is run over the long period of time. And despite their challenges, I think they're doing a lot of good things at HMP Parc. And I think the reasons why you would close on a contract is not the reasons that I saw on my visit. But it's we are always keeping a close eye on what is happening in all of our private prisons, and we will hold the teams to account whether there are areas that we are concerned with.
What sort of reasons would you conclude would need to take you back into public ownership?
I haven't read the details of this contract, but essentially it's around discharging of statutory duty, health and safety concerns, insufficient staffing, and general contractor default. But for me, obviously that's important, but also is the relationship colleagues like Ian have with the team at the prison. And whilst it may be run by a private organisation, if you are a prisoner, you don't get to choose whether you go to a public or a private prison. They all need to be excellent.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Llinos Medi, please.
Yeah, thank you. And you've touched a bit on this. The government has spent a lot of money in improving security in prisons, but unfortunately it seems like the organised crime groups have developed a sophisticated means of bringing contraband into prisons in spite of this investment. What plans, if any, do you have to further bolster security at Parc and the rest of the prison population?
Well, the one thing that keeps me awake at night doing this job is the impact of serious organised crime on what happens in a prison. And that involves drugs, it involves debt, it involves violence. And none of that helps what I'm interested in, which is rehabilitation and helping people get out and stay out so we have fewer victims. There are a number of areas that we are working on that I prefer not to talk about here, on drones and other aspects of security. But one of the issues we've had over the 25 years I've been involved in prisons is when you close one door, another one can open too. So it's important that we don't just focus on, for example, just drones, but there are all the other areas where drugs can come in. So so far as any specific investment goes at Parc, if there is anything, I will write to you, but I'm not aware of anything above and beyond what they're doing at the moment. But when I was at the visit last week, we had a long conversation with the security team on the action that they are taking. And if I compare that to what's happening in other similar prisons, I'm satisfied.
Thank you. And just an add-on to my previous question in the previous panel was around X-rays and staffing. And do you have any intentions of changing the legislation so that staff, that the prisons can then demand that the staff are X-rayed before they enter the prison?
I'm not aware of any impending changes to the rules on that. What I would say is that 99.9% of prison staff turn up to work every morning trying to help people turn their lives around. And that is my real focus, on inspiring them to do an amazing job.
Yeah, I agree, but unfortunately it's a small percentage that then has a negative impact on staffing capacity and the negative image on prison staff that we need to sort of and I hopefully over the years to come that the prison unions will work with you on ways to improve that staff corruption as well. When we were at Parc as well, the security team, we saw the way and the manner that they were trying to protect the prisoners in the site. But obviously there are many technologies that are evolving, and the tiny mobile phones were one of them that we also saw. And in the UK, they're advertised explicitly for this. Is there anything in legislation that you can do to sort of stop these companies from advertising this technology as a way of getting into the prisons?
I'm not aware of any impending legislation on this, but what I am aware of is that that is how phones can get in, and I think we need to consider what our options are, but we also need to consider why are people getting phones in. People are getting phones in because they want to organise their business activities out of prison, and they want to organise drugs and contraband coming in. One of the things that's a real focus for me, not just in Parc but all the other prisons that we are working with, is to ensure that people come in who may be addicted but they leave free of drugs, because what we don't want to do is just when people arrive in prison and they leave as better criminals, we want them to come out as better citizens.
And another thing that we saw while we were there is the use of the vape pen. And how they use that. And is there any plans to change the vape pen in any way so that it can actually safeguard the prisoners and the use of the modern drugs that they're using, we'll say?
Obviously, the reason why this is an issue is because people use the vapes as they are now to smoke spice and other drugs using the heat coil. The good news is we've got a trial starting in January in 2 prisons with a new design of vape. Having never been a vapor, I'm not really au fait with the logistics of how it actually works. But we think this new model will prevent the current problem. And we want to roll that out in the later half of next year. But as I mentioned before, when you close one door, another one opens. So we just need to make sure we are on top of that.
I'm going to introduce Alex Barrows-Curtis, who is guesting from the Justice Committee today, and I think you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. And just a very quick question to Lord Timpson, and it follows on from what you said about what keeps you up at night, and you mentioned something very similar when you gave very helpful evidence to the Justice Select Committee a couple of weeks ago. In terms of the from harm to hope drug strategy that is there about sort of tackling the drug problem in prisons, I just wonder what assessment you and the MOJ have made in terms of its effectiveness in that of that strategy to date.
I think we've got a long way to go on drugs, a long way. I think we need to see it as a public health problem, and I think we need to ensure that when people come in with significant drug problems, there are opportunities for them to turn their lives around. Substance-free wings, I think, are a really good way of supporting people, but it's also about getting them into purposeful activity, educating them, getting them in the library, helping them build meaningful relationships with officers and all the other experts who are there to help them. So I think it's a really big issue, but I also think it's a big opportunity for us, because if we can help people leave prison when they're not addicted to drugs or alcohol or other or all the other issues that they have, it's going to make a massive difference into the amount of reoffending that happens and the number of victims we have. So but I very much see it as a public health issue.
David Chadwick, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, Lord Timpson, the National Audit Office's latest report estimates that the programme to construct 20,000 additional prison places by the mid-2020s will now complete in 2031, costing at least £4.2 billion more than planned, and will still leave a shortage of 12,400 prison places by the end of 2027. Why is the programme so behind, and why has it cost so much more than anticipated?
The simple answer is that the previous government didn't get planning permission and didn't build prisons fast enough. That is why we're in this position now, and that is why we're in the position this summer when we got dangerously close to running out of prison places. We had less than 100 spaces. These prisons should have been built, and we will build those prisons.
And a follow-up, what will you do to ensure that the expected prison place shortage is mitigated and the government is not forced to release prisoners early and put the public in potential danger?
So we have no plans for any more emergency releases. We think we can operationally manage that, but we're also we've also set up the independent sentencing review that David Gauke, previous Lord Chancellor, is chairing, and one of they're currently in a asking for information phase up until January the 9th. So one of the things I would encourage everybody to do is to feed in any ideas and suggestions that they have into that review, because what's clear is that the prison population is increasing by 4,500 people a year. And what we need to do is to build new prisons. As when people are punished, they're sent to prison, but we also need to make sure we have enough prison places for them. We can't have more prisoners than we've got prisons.
Thank you. And for Ian, how will you ensure that the upcoming 10-year prison capacity strategy takes the unique delivery landscape of the criminal justice system in Wales into account?
So, obviously, part of my role, I work closely with colleagues in London in terms of prison capacity strategy and the work that they are doing. We've looked at the particular issues in Wales. We are anticipating 350 additional places as part of the strategy. 320 of those will come via a potential expansion at Parc, and another 30 via the form of rapid deployment cells to HMP Prescoid. Both of those are national resources. They're not simply a Wales resource, so obviously it's important that we work with the continuing work that we're already doing with capacity teams across HMPPS, across England and Wales, to ensure that maintains its fitness for purpose as we move forward.
What does HMPPS see as the future for privately run prisons?
I think that's probably a question for the Minister, if you don't mind.
Yeah. I think I sort of slightly touched on that before, which is I just want to see well-run prisons, and I can show you some excellent prisons that are run by private organisations, including G4S. HMP Oakwood is one where I've been many times to learn lots of ideas, but this comes down, for me, a lot to leadership, culture development, incredible focus on staffing and standards, and we want people to turn up to work, trying to turn people's lives around, and I just think it's really important that we have the consistency across the estate, where all the prisons are performing exceptionally well.
Thank you. Cleanos Medi, please.
I thought it was Anne.
Well,
we will share it.
I'll go then. We wanted to talk about women prisoners, to be honest, because how can you ensure that the unique circumstances of Welsh women offenders are accounted for in the Women's Justice Board and in the subsequent strategy that it intends to publish?
We're considering next steps following the formation of the Women's Justice Board. So we'll have, we'll have our first meeting in January, and on the Women's Justice Board we will have frog in my throat. We will have Welsh expertise on the Women's Justice Board. One of the things that I hear loud and clear is from colleagues in Wales is you don't want a women's prison in Wales, but we need better support for women, because most obviously go to HMP Eastwood or HMP Style. HMP Style is just down the road from where I live, and I've been going there since I was 7 years old, when my mum used to take the foster children to go and see their mum. So I'm well aware of the implications for Welsh women, and even sometimes Welsh women and their children, to be in prisons in England. But I think the Women's Justice Board is a really important step. And I know we've had a number of conversations around the Women's Centre potentially in Swansea, and I'm really interested in that. I'm also interested in non-residential women's centres. There's an example down in Southampton called Hope Street, which I've already spoken to Jane Hutt and others about as a really good example of something to have a look at. And I'm also very interested in the intensive supervision court model. I went and spent a day with a special intensive supervision court for women in Birmingham, and I thought that was exceptional, the way that the judge worked alongside housing experts, mental health experts, addiction experts, to offer an alternative to custody for women so they could stay at home, keep looking after their children, and not break all the other ties that they've got. So I think it's a really exciting area, but I think we need to get the Women's Justice Board up and running, and we need to really get going and delivering.
Can I just follow up on, you mentioned Swansea, because the department announced in May 2022 that the residential women's centre would open this year, actually. So do you see, do you have any further updates, or do you want to wait for the, are we going to wait for the justice system to get going before we have an announcement about Swansea and whether that's going to happen or not?
Yes, so the Women Justice Board, we're going to have our first meeting in January. We're going to come up with our plans, and then when we come up with our plans, we will, we'll consider all of the options. I mean, the great news about Swansea is you've already got planning permission, which, as we know, for a number of other prisons has taken an awful long time. But I think we need to look at it in the round for how we support the unique complexities that a lot of women in the justice system have, and how we divert them away from the justice system.
Okay, so would you mind?
I think moving on that is that my concern is that they'll be focused more in South Wales around the population, and obviously we're keen to that conversation to be up in North Wales, because keeping women as close to parents, I was a portfolio holder for social services, and being a safeguarding on children, making sure that that relationship is never broken is extremely important. But the capacity issue around North Wales is will you look across Wales on the services that women will have, and keeping that link to that community and their families?
I think it's a really important point. Although I live in England, when I look out of my bedroom window, I can see HMP Berwyn on a clear day. So I do look across Wales, but in a different way. I spent many years pioneering a social enterprise in Anglesey, recruiting young people and training them in a career in hospitality. I'm well aware of the issues around not just Anglesey, but North Wales as well, and how it links in with HMP Style and the support that women get there. So it takes a long time to drive from Holyhead down to Swansea. So I think it's another one of the things we need to consider.
We could, if I could just add, we just point out we do work very closely with Welsh Government and lots of third sector organisations in Wales. We've got a blueprint for women offenders in Wales, and I think that's served us well over the last few years in terms of responding to obviously the unique needs with not having a Welsh women's prison. I'm confident that will sort of serve us well going forward.
Thank you. Andrew Ranger, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I'm just interested in looking a bit into governmental relations. So can you sort of talk us through what challenges or opportunities you've found in delivering the justice system in a devolved context?
I think there are some great examples in Wales. I think the way that the youth services work alongside the justice system is excellent. I think the probation work that happens, the joined up working there, I think is excellent. But I'm very aware that it's around working really successfully together. And we are supporting the most complex people in the country. And the way we're going to reduce crime and have fewer victims is by making sure that all the work we do on healthcare, on education, on housing works really well. I mean, at HMP Parc, 90% of people who leave the prison have accommodation on release. Obviously, there's more to be done. The amount of people leaving prison and into work is good. Still more to be done. But if you compare that to others, and that proves that the joint working is something that is admirable. But I just think we need to keep working on giving clear direction of what we mean by how can we get really good results on addiction in prison. How can we make sure that when people leave prison, they have somewhere to live? They have a joined up linking with their probation teams, and the probation teams are there to support them. So one of the clear visions in my mind is this is a long-term fix. And I think we need to really focus on not trying to solve things tomorrow, but really understanding the complexity of these relationships and really build on the relationships that we have. Maybe Ian, you'd like to mention on that?
So I think I'd say that we've got strong relationships at an official level with Welsh Government. I mean, I regularly meet with Welsh Government ministers and officials in terms of ensuring that we are as joined up as we can. The Minister and indeed other ministers from the Ministry of Justice have already met with Jane Hutt, who's as you know, the Welsh Government Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice. So I think there's good level of engagement. HMPPS in Wales was established back in 2014, where it was the first time across England and Wales that we brought together prison and probation services, and we did that specifically to ensure that sort of engagement with the Welsh Government could be as comprehensive as possible.
Great, thank you very much. And the engagement with the interministerial group on justice, is that happening regularly? How often does that happen? Is it working effectively?
So the plan is we're looking at having the first meeting that I will be at in early next year. And it's something that I think is really important because there's good things happening in lots of different places. So, for example, in Northern Ireland, in Hyde Bank Wood prison, I mean, I've been there a number of times before. I'm a bit of a prison geek, so it's they do exceptional work on women and how they school the young people in their care. In Scotland, they're doing some really interesting things on the number of children in prison. I think they're down to 5 children who are in prison in Scotland. So I think it's a really important forum for us all, and I know I've spoken to officials already, and they're trying to sort out a date as early as possible in the new year.
And in terms of obviously the UK government's manifesto commitment about devolving youth justice and probation to Wales, what conversations have you had around that with Welsh Government?
I think where we are is it's something, so in our manifesto commitment that we're going to consider it. I think we really should consider it. Obviously, when we came into government, we inherited a prison system, justice system in crisis. We've stabilised things. We've still got an awful lot more to do. And when the independent sentencing review concludes and we understand where that lands, that's when we will look again at this point.
Okay. And
Linos Medi just wanted to
sorry, yeah, sorry.
On that one, and I declared in instance that I was a member of the Gwynedd and Moore Youth Justice Board for 5 years, but I think if there are going to be delays in devolving youth justice, can I just please ask that you do look at the funding model of youth justice in Wales, because the Barnett formula doesn't quite work for youth justice in the way that the funding happens in England. Wales are deprived of funding in the youth justice, and that means that our young people aren't receiving the best service possible. So please, can I urge you to look at that on behalf of us? Is that okay? Yeah.
Rather than a question. Okay. Yeah. Andrew Ranger.
I hear you.
Just to probably link into that point really, how will the reviews such as the Independent Commission on the Constitutional Future of Wales and the Brown Commission inform those considerations on that devolution of youth justice and probation?
I think, as I said before, that it is a case of timing. We want to get the independent sentencing review concluded because we don't know where they're going to end up, and there are lots of implications around community sentencing, technology. So we have to wait and see what they say. But I think one of the things we need to make sure we focus on is how do we reduce reoffending, reduce the number of victims, and make sure our prisons are safe places.
Anything to add to that, Ian? Or? No, to add to that, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Steve Witherden, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just like to ask a question about sentencing, if I may. The Ministry of Justice is currently undertaking an independent sentencing review due to report in spring 2025. How will you ensure that the unique delivery environment of Wales, in which many criminal justice adjacent services are devolved to the Welsh Government, is taken into account when implementing any recommendations? And are there any plans in place to appoint a Welsh representative to the independent panel? Thank you.
Well, the call for evidence is until the 9th of January, and the review recognises the potential impact of the recommendations on areas such as community-based sentencing in Wales as a devolved administration. So the review team are very keen to hear your views, and if I can do anything to support that conversation, then please let me know.
Something that's been touched on briefly already. Distance from home can be a key to ensuring a prisoner's successful rehabilitation and is especially relevant to Welsh women's offenders given the lack of women's prisons in Wales. Will the sentencing review be assessing HMPPS prisoner placement procedures? And if not, do you have any other plans to ensure offenders can serve their sentences closer to their homes and their support networks?
You're exactly right. I mean, one of the key pillars of reducing reoffending is family ties. And when someone is far away from home and doesn't have that contact, then that makes it harder. Although this is not an example in Wales, I was in Winchester Prison last week, and I was saddened to hear from the Governor that only 50% of the prisoners in the prison receive any contact from family at all. that's phone calls and visits. And but what we need to do is ensure that our allocation processes are correct, but obviously we need to consider a number of things as well, so far as time left to serve, categorisation, sentence requirements, but closeness to family and home is an important part of that allocation. The capacity issues that we inherited have not been helpful because we've been just trying to find places for people to go, but already we're seeing the benefits of some extra capacity we have in the system now. But you know, it's not just about being closer to home, it's about the other ways we can support prisoners and their families on communication. I think, you know, I don't know whether you saw it on your visit, but there was a fantastic example of a charity called Invisible Walls doing some fantastic work. I'm a big fan of Storybook Dads, but we need to give every opportunity to keep those communication lines open, especially prisoners who have children, so they can maintain those family connections. Because when they're out, they need to hit the ground running and be able to take on the parental roles that they had before they went in prison.
Thank you, Chair. One final question for Mr Barrow. Why does Wales have such a high imprisonment rate?
So I think there are a number of factors in that, including how that was calculated. I mean, I think you're probably referring to some of the work that Dr Rob Jones did earlier. One of the things that we've not currently got in HMPPS is an ability to sort of actually define somebody as Welsh. So we often use home address or sometimes court addresses. I think that imprisonment rate was slightly impacted by the number of English prisoners in HMP Barrow. I think that's affected on it. I mean, I am actually, and I've met with Dr Jones a number of times this year, so I'm working with him both in terms of some of the data issues that you mentioned earlier, Chair, but also to sort of ensure we've got proper dialogue ongoing in terms of understanding some of the information that he's presenting, because if nothing else for me and the role that I've got, it's incredibly important for me to get that level of insight and to work with him on that. But I think that there are definitely a couple of ways, I think, of interpreting that data, and I think, if I'm being honest, the way that we've sort of provided some of the freedom of information requests perhaps doesn't always give the full picture in terms of whether somebody is Welsh and what that means in terms of imprisonment rates.
Thank you, Chair.
I think, and obviously the committee was surprised to see that previously FOIs had been granted, and the question is, on what grounds were they not granted this time? And I suppose that's, you know, we've had comparable data over the last few years, which has been really, really helpful. And we know from that data that Welsh prisoners, Welsh citizens are more likely to be locked up than English citizens, for instance. And it's good to actually get under the details, obviously, and understand why. So I think that's why we were so surprised at that. And if you have anything further to add, that's great. But if not, we will write to before the close of play today.
As I said, I am working with Dr Jones in terms of trying to sort of resolve that situation. I think this particular request was denied on the basis of the volume of requests that had come through. I mean, as I said, from my point of view, I'm keen to see that data as well. I would also point out, though, that one of the things we are working with Dr Jones and Welsh Government about is we do already publish a lot of disaggregated Welsh data. I think sometimes that gets lost in the wider publication. But, for example, we've got lots of information on prisoners, the regime types, issues about education, substance abuse, etc. is already published. But we are keen to sort of work on it and come to a satisfactory conclusion.
I'm sure written follow-ups will be helpful. Alex Barrows-Curtis, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the topic of sentencing, but also reoffending, which has been talked about in today's session. Obviously, Minister, it's in your job title, and it's a passion of yours. I just wanted to mention and then invite any comments either of you gentlemen have. The Justice Select Committee's first inquiry that it's announced is into the cycle of reoffending. And you know, obviously we have a focus particularly on England and Wales, but the numbers are extraordinarily high, as we know. Sort of, I think it was at 23. Those convicted of an indictable offence, I think 78 or 80% had 78% had already had a prior conviction. So it's something we absolutely need to look at, and I know that's in the independent sentencing review's terms of reference. I just wonder, in terms of a plea that your respective organisations, MOJ, HMPPS and Wales, and more broadly, of course, sort of contribute to that inquiry, because I think it's really important that they do. But it's also just a question as to whether or not you feel at the moment you have enough data and evidence and information in order to sort of understand what that is, in order to then implement policies, procedures that challenge that, or do we still have quite a long way to go, and therefore, what is it we here in Parliament and more broadly in the wider communities need to be thinking about in order to really tackle what is obviously a really serious problem?
I was very pleased when I was allowed to get reducing reoffending into my job title, because it's something that I've been involved in 25 years. I'm really passionate about it. When 80% of offending is reoffending, we're clearly doing something wrong. And we also know what the main building blocks are to help someone live a crime-free life so we have fewer victims and can protect the public. It is mental health under control, addiction under control, somewhere to live, and a job. And if I just take the job example, when I first set up the employment advisory boards, we had 14% of prisoners leaving prison and getting a job after 6 months. We've now got up to 37%. So we know that we've still got a long way to go, but that makes a difference. So I think it's important for me that we focus on the main areas specifically. And also, so far as the data goes, there is a lot of data everywhere, but one thing you can't beat is walking around a prison and speaking to staff and speaking to prisoners and talking to them about what are their plans for when they're released and what are their concerns and what are the issues. And a lot of the issues come down to housing and employment. And so we need to make sure that when people leave prison, they're going to leave as really good citizens, not going to be criminals again. Because this cycle of reoffending, I'm sure you've spoken to prison staff, I'm sure you've seen it, and other colleagues have seen this over the years, that when someone's released, you know they're going to be back in 4 weeks' time. And that is not an acceptable way for us to help people overcome their criminality, because that just creates more victims and doesn't protect the public. So it's something that we know a lot of it, but what we need to do is to really focus and use the data. And also, one of the things that I find interesting doing this job is from having someone who's run a multiple retail business, where a lot of the shops are the same. A lot of our prisons are there to do a similar thing. Cat C's are there to do a similar sort of thing. And I think we can do a lot more comparing similar prisons and how they perform on all those different metrics. Because most prisons do a number of things exceptionally well, but it's how we can raise the bar across the whole estate I'm really interested in. And whilst I won't be thinking too much as of a retailer, I do think this consistency is something that we need to really push on.
And it's before you do jump in, Mr. Barrow, and please do, I think you're absolutely right, Minister, in terms of the kind of, it's got to be an holistic approach. So it's not just siloed to the MOJ, it's got to be across government, across local authorities, across the devolved administrations, and that's something we really do think need to get under the hood of, because as you say, when we did a select committee visit to HMP Brixton, saw the success of a substance abuse free ward, but this was a common refrain, and it's a real challenge. I don't know, Mr. Barrow, if you want to add
that was
more.
the exact point I was about to make, actually, that it's one of the reasons why in Wales we're very keen on that partnership approach with Welsh Government, with local authorities, with third sector organisations, because ensuring that sort of holistic approach, and indeed that the people are linked into services when their time with prison operation comes to an end. It's so important.
And a range of the final question, please.
It's just a very quick one. I think you probably covered a similar subject, actually. That obviously in both panels today we've heard about lots of challenges, but there's lots of really good stuff happening as well in different places. And I was just interested to what is the mechanism and how that is shared of best practice, and if there is a formal mechanism, is it informal? How's that managed?
Maybe if you answer that.
So I don't think we've been as good as we can have been over the years in terms of sharing good news stories. Well, I think that we have now got 7 people in my position throughout England and Wales, so we're doing a lot more in terms of sharing a good practice and sharing good stories. We've got individual comms teams in HMPPS where we are keen to sort of get as many news stories as we can out there. We're keen, as I think you acknowledged, to ensure that people have got access to our sites where appropriate, so we're hosting visits from a range of sort of elected officials from local authorities up to House of Commons, and I'm keen to talk about the good work we're doing all the time, so I would welcome any approaches anybody would have about that.
And I think if I could just add that when prisons are 99.9% full, it's difficult to innovate. All you can do is get people 3 meals a day, a shower, and a bit of time in the exercise yard. What we need to do is to get capacity under control and to support the incredibly hard-working officers and staff we have in prisons to be able to do what they signed up to do, which is to help people turn their lives around. And so there's an awful lot of work we need to do around technology so we can improve, and this is certainly the case of probation, because I'm pretty sure that people join probation, the probation service, because they want to spend their time with offenders, not doing admin. So there's an awful lot of work we need to do on simple innovation, on making sure that our amazing staff have time face-to-face with offenders, because it's often that time that is the formative experience of helping people open up and turn their lives around. So I think, I'm really interested. I mean, there are so many. I don't think the Ministry of Justice is short of ideas. What we need to do is to make sure we pick the ones that are going to make a significant difference, and technology is going to be a big part of that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I want to thank this second panel this morning, Ian Barrow and Lord Timpson, for your time and the way you've engaged with us this morning. It's been really, really helpful and constructive to our discussions on HMP Parc. So thank you both for this. I will now suspend this session.